Side Order, the second wave of Splatoon 3's expansion pass, is a roguelite about climbing a tower while progressively getting stronger. And today we'll talk about how its game design makes it so fun and replayable. Oh, this video will include full spoilers for Side Order, so maybe put it off a bit if you've not completed the story yet. Side Order is a roguelite, so let's first talk about that term. Roguelite is derivative from roguelike, which describes a genre of games where failing means retrying from the very start. This permadeath is a deliberate design choice, and replaying the same content multiple times is the core of these games. Usually, roguelikes will implement a random world generation and some sort of progressive upgrade system to make each run different from the last. The idea behind this is that the difficulty stays the same for each run, but player skill and knowledge of the game's systems will improve over time, so the player is eventually able to finish runs. Roguelites take the same idea but make it a bit more accessible. Here there are permanent upgrades that the player keeps for each run. Usually this is achieved through a currency that the player gets after each run and is spendable in a hub world before a run. The upside of roguelites is that every player will eventually be able to beat the game, regardless of how good they are, by just spending more time in the game. The downside is that the game gets this weird difficulty progression, where the game is hardest the first time you play, and gets easier after that. For normal games, the skill difficulty curve should ideally match, so the player is never overwhelmed but also always challenged. Such a progression is basically unfeasible with the core concept of roguelikes and roguelites. Often, designers will answer that issue by, instead of looking at the overarching progression, creating a difficulty curve within each run, so that the start of the run is easy to clear, but then becomes more and more difficult towards the end. That results in all players being able to play the game and have fun until it becomes too difficult for them, at the cost that more skilled players may be bored and have to repeatedly play the easy part of the run. Side Order is a roguelite, and it basically has all the characteristics that we talked about, but adds one main idea to the mix that makes it stand out from a game design perspective. But more on that later. In Side Order you climb the spire, which consists of 30 floors, 3 of which are boss fights. A floor is a small playing field with 1 of 5 objectives, which are normally completed in 1 to 3 minutes. A run ends when the player has no lives anymore, at which point the spire has to be started over from the bottom. Each run starts with an empty palette, which will be filled up with upgrades, so-called color chips, throughout the run. Specifically, the game gives you the option to choose between 3 color chips on each floor. This choice also determines which objective and floor layout you are going to play. The color chips upgrade different aspects of your loadout, for example the main weapon, the sub-weapon, movement speed, how many items drop and other utility. And the great thing about the chips, which I feel like is a shortcoming of other games, is that the impact can be felt immediately. This is not a kind of 5% more movement speed, this is 22% more movement speed with only one chip, up to 166% with all 5 chips of this type. Same with, for example, the charge speed of chargers. The max upgrade makes you literally wield a sniper rifle. This game is designed around the upgrades being strong, the player getting overpowered, and it answers by also adjusting the difficulty accordingly. The higher up the tower you are, the more enemies spawn, more oppressive enemies spawn, more difficult floor layouts appear, the chance for danger modifiers rises, the price to stock up on lives in vending machines goes up, and bosses become more difficult. Many designers are scared to make upgrades impactful because the game might become too easy, but my opinion on that is if upgrades are not impactful with each one you get, there are either too many or the upgrades actually don't meaningfully impact the game, at which point they are redundant. The way upgrades are done in Side Order means the player is able to consciously pick color chips to become overpowered through one specific way. You can, for example, always pick color chips that upgrade your main weapon, or go for a run that focuses on constant item drops and special output, but you do not have enough color chips to do both at the same time. Combined with that, the high amount of different color chips and different main weapons create an enormous number of different options of how the run will play out, and thus achieve what is the goal of all roguelikes: enormous replayability. Before we go on to talk about the permanent roguelite upgrade system in Side Order, I want to first direct your attention to the specific design of the floors themselves. As mentioned earlier, each of them is a short asymmetric game where you must complete one of 5 objectives. The fun in completing these tasks is mostly the risk and reward of fighting enemies and pushing the objective. In that sense, it is very similar to Salmon Run, and I'd encourage you to check out my video on that after this one if you're interested. I'd hope that regular viewers of my channel know what risk and reward means by now, but for those new here, it means that fundamentally the fun of playing games comes from actions having equal parts risk and reward, so the player must choose whether to play it safe or go for the risky but high reward option. In Turbine, for example, there are these checkpoints, which take some effort and risk to clear, but when cleared create a shockwave that sends enemies flying. In Destroy the Portals, it is risky to try destroying the portal when many enemies are around, but if you manage to do it successfully, the explosion will reward you by getting rid of all the enemies at once. Similar, though less direct, risk and reward balancing exists for the other objectives as well. Zone control is mostly about taking out the drizzling Capriccios, while also managing enemy spam. Running foes works similarly, and Infinity Ball adds the reward of rolling enemies over while having the risk of them knocking the ball away. Risk and reward is also in certain enemy design, for example shooting down the attacks of Gushing Giant Fails, destroying the weak points of the spawning Accordo, or shooting down the top of the towering Noblimente. I think the expansion falls short a bit in the aspect of enemy and boss variety, but I must credit that the ones that do exist are very neatly designed. More variety would have increased the replayability though. I said earlier that it doesn't take long to clear a floor. I have to imagine that the time of how long they take to complete, as well as the number of total floors, must have been toyed with a lot, because it seems very difficult to get right. I think many take design aspects like this for granted, but they determine the pace of the game, and that is incredibly important. Side Order's macro-scale game loop consists of repeatedly choosing a color chip and floor and then beating it. If the floors took significantly longer to clear, the total run would take ages and would be very tiring, at which point the number of floors would need to be reduced, at which point the entire color chip system falls apart. Different objectives already take different amounts of time, and some are already very fast clears, so the thought experiment of making them shorter is a bit more difficult. However, we can imagine how every floor would be as fast as the quicker ones, at which point you wouldn't get to play much of the game. We can see that in speedruns, which usually clear floors in less than 10 seconds by only choosing the fast objectives and getting the right color chips to create a ridiculously strong main weapon. I do see the fun in trying to beat the game as fast as possible, but I think it is a good thing that normally the floors take a bit longer than this. The way it is done right now, with some faster and slower floors, makes for a pretty good distribution, I think. That is where the good part comes in though. I, the player, get to choose not only which color chips to obtain, but also which floors and objectives to play. Usually you can only choose from 3 random floors, but with some permanent upgrades we'll get into later, you can have a much greater choice. Because of that, I can choose the pacing of the game myself, whether it be conscious or subconscious. I can choose myself what objective I want to play, if I want to take the risk of a danger modifier, or if that cool color chip is really worth playing Cruel Sisyphean 8-shaped floor and possibly ending the run. If I, for example, find Portal a much more enjoyable mode than Infinity Ball, I can choose that more. If I want to speedrun, I can choose all the fast floors. Giving the player the choice, the power to balance different factors to gauge what to do and to choose difficulty and pace themselves, is something this expansion pass does a lot, and that, in my opinion, separates it a lot from other roguelites. It is of course by far not the only game to go into that direction, but I've never seen it to this extent. Because the choices go beyond just during the run. After each run, you gain the currency pearls to spend outside of each run, and this is where we get into the roguelite territory. With pearls, you can buy hacks from Arena, which are permanent upgrades that help you during the run. These upgrades include, but are not limited to, more lives, taking less damage, dealing more damage, and a discount on items during the run. Those are just normal roguelite upgrades that make the run easier. There are a few hacks I want to talk about more in depth though. First, we have the hack to reset a floor selection to choose from new floors with new color tips, at the price of some currency during the run. This is great because it doesn't directly make the run easier, it does so indirectly by reducing the impact of randomness and allowing better selection of color tips for a specific build you might be going for. Same goes for the vending machine reset. And then we have the greatest idea that I've ever seen in a roguelite, which is a hack that rewards you for using less hacks. The way this works is that you will gain more pearls at the end of a run, the less other hacks are active. However, not completing the run successfully will result in no pearls to be obtained at all. This incentivizes trying to run with as little hacks as possible to maximize profits, whilst also using enough hacks to be able to finish the run consistently. Remember risk and reward we talked about? The essence in making games fun? This is exactly that. The game not only gives you the choice of what hacks you want to use even after you bought them, it also rewards you for taking the risk of using less and making the run harder for yourself. I'd like you to recall what we talked about at the start of the video in regard to skill curves in roguelites, how it gets easier over time, allowing all players to beat the game but also making it too easy and boring at later points. This one hack and the ability to not use hacks even after buying them completely solves this issue because skilled players can, and crucially are incentivized to, use as little hacks as possible. This system allows players to choose themselves how difficult they want to make the run for themselves. Some friends of mine, for example, challenged themselves and beat the game without using any hacks at all, while I wanted to control the color chips I obtained better, so I did most of my runs using only these upgrades. Also, double damage is overpowered and that makes it very funny. And one more thing. The final challenge of the game, finishing a run with Agent 8's palette, takes this to the extreme by literally forcing you to either tone back the hacks you use or play with very few color tips. There are some other design aspects I want to touch upon. First, the Pearl Drone. I would argue that the main design utility of the Pearl Drone are not the color chips that are connected to it, but rather the ability to glide through the air. Usually being in the air is one of the states in Splatoon where you have the least control, right behind being stuck in enemy turf with an empty ink tank. You are slower than swimming in ink, have little air control and are on a very predictable flight path. Splatoon is a very vertical game, but in multiplayer the only way to gain height is always by swimming up inkable walls. The little air control is deliberate and makes sense in an environment like this, where the main duality of the game is supposed to be shooting and swimming in ink. However, this is not the same for an expansion like this. The movement system is still the same, but there's no balancing to worry about anymore, and the duality of moving and shooting is honestly not as important in this context. Side Order utilizes verticality a lot, even more than the multiplayer maps. The ability to glide using the Pearl Drone feels so good because it gives control over movement where there previously wasn't any. It allows for so many interactions using verticality, such as the springs dropped by springing Spiccato and the hack that launches you into the air when your armor is broken. You will notice how important the glide is when you get a danger modifier where you don't have the drone. Second, the music. I think everyone who has played Splatoon enough knows that these artists absolutely know what they are doing, and Side Order is no different. I really love how the music in the elevator gets more tense the higher you are. And how floor music gets more chaotic. I've only used music from the expansion in this video, so I guess you will have to rewatch it to listen to all of it again. I also really like the use of leitmotifs, both old ones from previous games, for example Onward, and some new ones as well, like when completing a floor. Third, the tutorial. You know that a tutorial is done right when players aren't even aware that they are in one. And from the gameplay I've watched on YouTube, I think many didn't. The tutorial tower climb does a great job at introducing the game's mechanics in a neat way, and without any text walls. It shows off the core gameplay loop, the objectives, and even ends in its own boss. I really like how it's integrated into the story. I also like that the game explains a lot of things through just playing, and even the dialogue explaining the game's core is kept more or less short. Fourth, the bosses. The general purpose of bosses in video games is to provide gameplay with a greater challenge and reward, and I think 3 of the 4 bosses in Side Order do a great job at that. Intensifying Harmony is my personal favorite of the 3 Spire bosses, because it's always fun to fight, and the enemies actually scale in difficulty with how many color chips you have of a certain type. Asynchronous Rondo is also a fun one though. It is a bit more based on controlling enemies and not dying to the boss's attacks, but there is still strategy to be found. With a long-range weapon, for example, you can specifically target the layers with glowing lights, since they are the only ones that matter for defeating the boss. The boss that I don't like is Pinging Merkiel. It's not a bad boss. I think the idea of a weak point that expands in size after attacks is good, but I heavily dislike how you have to spend 90% of the time chasing it down, just for it to fly away again when damaged. The fight also feels a bit bland because of the flat ground, there is absolutely no verticality. I like the Spire bosses overall though. I think more variety would have helped replayability, but the color chips already do that, so it's not the worst thing. For the Smollusk fight, my hypothesis is that the developers had correctly found out that Portal is the most fun objective, because of its risk and reward relationship, and thought to themselves that they should make a boss fight with this mechanic. This includes the Marina fight, by the way. I counted the 2 as one because they are basically the same. I really like the boss's use of special weapons as well. It's been a while since I've seen actually threatening reef sliders. In seriousness though, they all do a great job of pressuring the player with hitboxes and paint on the floor. And last, but certainly not least, the story and lore behind Side Order. This is the most spoiler heavy section of this video, so feel free to skip to this timestamp if you don't want the story and dev entries to be spoiled. After clearing the Spire for the first time, I personally was a bit disappointed with the story. I was hoping the struggle with Order would be a little more philosophical. For me, the narrative of Order wanting a grayscaled world just for the sake of complete order was, while not uninteresting, a bit unimaginative in the interpretation of Order. And the game is not really subtle in the way it presents its message of how much order and chaos there should really be. It makes for a good villain that we'd want to stop, but it's not much more than that. In opposition to that, Tata in Splatoon 2 Octo expansion, for example, is a good villain that simultaneously touches upon eugenics, and that expansion as a whole is also about oppression and racism. Order touches upon the philosophical concept of order versus freedom, but it honestly doesn't go very deep. However, the expansion makes up for that with its depth when continuing playing, mostly through Marina's dev diary entries. Because the game is not over after beating the Spire one time. Through beating Smollusk again and again, you get deeper insights into Order, which somewhat changed my view on the main story. Maybe it's okay to have a main story that's a bit clearer in its message if it's followed up with more in-depth content after. It is a roguelike after all, a game that is designed to be replayed. In my opinion, the dev entries make up for a huge amount of that more subtle message. In the dev diaries, it is explained what the purpose of the Memverse as a computer program made by Marina is. She wanted to help Octolings who emerged from the underground regain their memories and their soul after sanitization in the deep sea metro. Color chips represent general memories extracted from memcakes. The palette is a copy of the character's soul, and climbing the spire is a process to reunite soul and memories in the subject. It's interesting to me that we get to play the palettes of lots of different characters, also ones that are not Octolings, but that is probably just a pragmatic game design reason and doesn't matter much. In general, Side Order deals with the mind, consciousness, a soul, and the integration of Octolings into Inkling society. I think it does a very nice job of following up on Octo Expansion. As in Octo Expansion, the lore background is quite dark, which is something that Nintendo seems to like doing. Even if Nintendo were to primarily see this from a financial perspective to make people more invested into their game series, I don't care as long as the lore that arrives at my Switch is interesting to my brain. I don't want to go too much into my artistic understanding of video games, but I think it is undeniable that video games have the highest artistic potential of any medium. It presents concepts in an interactive way that would be impossible for a book, music, a painting, or even a movie. And I like a lot that Splatoon makes use of that potential, especially in its expansions. Not as much as I might want it to, but still to a very high degree. Oh, another interesting aspect to think about. In the last two entries, Marina gives the members the final name of Dramatic Days in Orderland, which I think is a reference to Alice's adventures in Wonderland, down to the alliteration at the start. I haven't read the book, but from what I know, I can see the similarities in getting sucked into a fantasy/virtual world respectively. Cool food for thought. I find it interesting seeing Splatoon as a roguelite, because they are not concepts I thought would go well together, but alas, I've been proven wrong. I like that Nintendo and Splatoon's development team are willing to deviate from the known and trusted formulas to develop new and innovative interpretations of Splatoon's core. From the amazing color chip upgrade system to the way hacks are implemented, from the risk and reward relations found everywhere to the player-chosen difficulty, and from the music to the lore and philosophical concepts, I think it's safe to say that they created an amazing roguelite. Thank you for watching. Hey, thanks a lot for listening to the end. If you have an opinion on anything I said in this video, feel free to comment your thoughts below. I'd be especially interested in hearing y'all's interpretation of the expansion story and what you think the allusion to Alice in Wonderland might mean.